Good morning and good afternoon. Um, we're going to start with the topic we all hate, but we keep coming back to, which is artificial intelligence. And I want to start this because I kind of prompted it because of an experience I had. I'm in a local writing group that meets every once a month for lunch, and we just talk about writing and what we're doing and things like that. And the group also puts on some different events, and one of them is a writing conference every other September. And so 2 months ago, during the talk about what you're doing these days, one of the other writers just kind of casually mentioned that she uses AI for something. And I don't remember what it was, but I was kind of surprised at how casually she mentioned it and how no one kind of raised questions about using AI. So then at the meeting lunch at the beginning of this month, the topics for the fall conference were disclosed, and one of them is the title is using AI tools or how to use AI tools. And after the president of the group or whatever she is was finished with the topics, I kind of opened up a conversation about AI and what that meant and what other people were doing. And I don't know if there's a difference between AI and generative AI. But when I first kind of raised the question of why people would be using AI, someone says, "Well, when you use Google, that's AI." Okay, I get it. There's basically AI everywhere. Before we started recording, Audrey was actually Bertold mentioned that Zoom now has an AI companion, and Word has an AI widget that you can't get off of the screen, and WordPress has. I mean, everything has some kind of AI tool connected to it now. So in some ways, it's almost impossible to get away from it. And we've actually been using AI for years. I mean, the what everybody refers to as the algorithm with social media, that's a form of AI, isn't it? Is that accurate? The algorithm is basically AI, or maybe a very rudimentary version of it, and that's been like the backbone of websites for a long time. What do you
Uh,
think? Is Richard? Is that
well, okay. The problem with AI before going into the problems using AI is that the nomenclature, which is what you're really hitting on here, is I think inappropriate at this point. We need better labels.
yeah?
For instance, what we are calling AI, and most people calling AI things like Chat GPT, or I've heard of more aptly labeled as stochastic parroting, meaning that there's no artificial intelligence per se as we see, say, in movies or have been or I've, like I said, I from graduate school I was actually involved in AI programs, but training computers to be intelligent. This is more of statistically hitting on the appropriate response from a collected set of responses in general. So that's why stochastic parroting, statistically getting the best response and tweaking that. So it's not thinking, it's not reasoning in, even in some rudimentary sense. And so I have tried to get in the habit of calling that generative AI, as you called it. But when you start, and that then falls more in the line of, yeah, like, things like algorithms and stuff like that, which are just simply trying to, you go to a music thing and it's trying to pick what we think you like, Netflix, here's some films we think you like. That is the most rudimentary version because all it's looking at is keyword matching based on things you said you liked, et cetera. But that is what it really is. And then even within what might be considered generative AI, I think the real issue with me and many people is what was used to train. Now, when you go to use Google and you see it has AI, generative AI results, what it's using to train is I think generally, best I understand it, is everything that's out there on the web right now. And then it has a number of algorithms to weed out what are probably nonsensical, et cetera. What are most likely hit, what are, what match best, et cetera. It does that. So we can argue, or people can argue whether or not, what are the ethical things about getting anything that's on the web, as opposed to where I have the biggest issue, where items are trained with full knowledge that you're taking materials which normally we would consider copyright protected, protected in some way, that these were not approved for release. They weren't generally posted out there. Or if they were posted by people who stole the material.
Yeah.
And one more point, and I'll quiet down on that because we'll hit our list. No, kind of escapes me right now. Oh, that's it. There are products out there, and again, I don't know how legitimate they claim. Like I was looking at Adobe products where they were saying, "Hey, we have a new tool that you could create images and stuff," and they say that the images were trained on photographs, et cetera, that they paid for. They paid for use. I think that's a real strong, if it is true and is valid, positive step for companies to take. I made the joke once before we hit this top about putting tags on like dolphin free tuna. We used to. Well, I think we need to do that on, paid for training.
Yeah.
But I think the next step is that somewhere in there, you can access a list which cites all the contributors, just like you do for a movie. Yeah, no one wants to sit through those 15 minutes of scrolling credits at the end, but those are all the people that contributed. And then, sometimes you get a little fun thing after that, but that's what's needed somewhere, is like acknowledgement, just like we do and we have done in the world of literature for ages, is contributors, and cite them. I used to write scientific journals. You had to footnote and cite everything, so that everyone who contributed, and you can also then go and see that work if you wanted to. So anyway, that's it on nomenclature.
Thank you, sir. I think the biggest, there were two issues that, I mean, there's using AI for writing an email or doing a search or something like that. But then when it comes to things that are creative, that are supposed to be, to me anyway, created by human beings, and using AI to either support something like that or to entirely replace it, is where it just kind of gets my hackles up. And so when this happened at the meeting this month, I asked, and someone said, "Well, Google's AI," and it's like, okay, I don't think I'm talking about Google. But one of the writers said that she uses AI to help her with editing her manuscripts and also to do covers for her. And at one point, the other piece of this came up, and I said, when you use AI for your cover, there's a human being out there who could have done your cover for you, who won't have a job because you used AI for
And
it. And so that's kind of,
I was going to say,
go ahead.
and who probably in some way contributed to that. And
Yeah,
again,
right.
very likely stolen from some artist and then combined with other images from other artists to give you.
Yeah.
So go on. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. So I came up with this list of different things where do would using AI, whether it's rudimentary AI or generative AI or whatever, would it be okay to use AI for editing, for designing a cover, to produce an outline of a story, for prompts to come up with stories, for getting you through a rough patch, for identifying potential story endings? These are all things that I've seen writers talk about online as having used AI for this. I've seen someone, there's like, I'm at a part in the story and I don't know if I should do this or this or this, and so I asked AI and AI told me this and it worked. So anyway, I'm just curious where you all might draw the line, or if there is a line, and if any of those things are okay versus not okay from your perspective.
Okay, well, where I draw the line is I guess using it to fix your grammar and spelling, I guess. You know, they're like, I don't know, these Grammarly and other things. I never use them, but I can see using something like that. That's basically a more sophisticated version of spell check. But that would be about it. I mean, in terms of creating the story, that's what we're supposed that's what we writers do. We do it out of our imaginations and out of our own brains. And I think as soon as you open that door to help you with the rough patch, well, you might as well just turn the whole thing over and say, AI, write me a book that has this plot and it's this many words, and you know, go for it. I like the mood to be something else, and then you just go and watch TV, and then you come back and see what it turned up. And if you don't like it, you do it again. I just can't imagine working. I mean, if that was it, I would just forget about writing and go and do gardening. That'd be it. I've drawn the line. And in fact, using it for creating those two audiobooks, I think is about the most transgression I've done because it's true. By doing that, I in effect kind of theoretically deprived some voice actors of a job. Not that I would have hired the voice actors because I don't know, I just haven't thought about doing that, and I think it'd be fairly expensive, and I don't know. I mean, I just haven't gone there. So it wasn't sort of voice actor or AI. It was kind of like AI or not do it at all. But I still sort of think, well, that wasn't so, you know, if I'm going to be ethical, that wasn't ethical. So those two books are still out there. They're free. I don't know if they'll ever really catch on. I haven't revisited them, and that's about it. And in terms of cover design, I design my own covers, and I always use free elements from sites like Pixabay.
Yeah.
And that I haven't ever tried having AI make a cover, and I probably won't do that either. And, you know, really, my writing now and publishing is kind of a hobby, and I think I'm going to leave it at that level and tell AI to get lost. So that's where I'm at.
I don't view using one of the basically automated audiobook uh, programs as really being artificial intelligence. And I don't know what others think about that because I mean, and if it is, it's at the very, very rudimentary level. I don't know,
I don't
Richard.
know. I
What?
gather
Might depend
those
on the tool.
Yeah,
Because
the voices are trained on actual, you know, voices gathered
yeah.
from everywhere. I
right.
mean, our
Okay.
voices, for
Yeah.
instance, this
Okay.
discussion
Yeah.
could be.
Whereas what I was working on over 30, 40 years ago, which I'm sure has progressed, is there was manufactured speech. And I had done the studies to mimic just one factor, which is, and I don't want to bore people, but when you smile, when you speak, ears can pick that up, that a person's smiling without seeing it. And I'm not about happiness. You could be flat affect. You could just be, speaking because your vocal track changes. And I was able to mimic that by modulating the wave sounds from speech phonemes. And I was able to mimic that where people were, detecting smiling from a computer, which is kind of funny. But anyway, that kind of AI, I think, Mark, is what you're saying is, and it actually exists out there where these speaking tools were not trained on available speakers out there, like
Yeah.
listening to Bob Burton and stealing his stuff and using his voice, James Earl Jones, whatever, and manufacturing that. But there are some that were truly, again, AI as we used to term it. So it depends on the tool. Sorry again.
That's okay.
Bertel, you answer next, and then I'll next.
Well, I think I'm largely in agreement with you and Audrey, but I'll say this. So the only thing I've ever thought about is because I write science fiction, I occasionally have characters who are AI. And so at that point, I've sometimes thought to myself, would it be interesting to use an AI to write dialogue for a character that is itself an AI in the story, to figure out like just because it's not going to have patterns that are like what I would give it. So could I take an AI, say an AI, what would you give me a line of dialogue for this situation? I've never done it. It's really the only use of AI I've ever considered because as much as anything, I think it would be an experiment. But sort of my principled objection to AI makes me not want to do it, so I haven't so far. Otherwise, I mean, like editing, yeah, I mean, I know I have a family member who's a great cover designer, so I'm good on that. I really have no reason otherwise to use AI.
I have actually going to make three assumptions here as Mark steps away. The first assumption is that, look, it's advances in technology. It is impossible to not have people lose jobs. That is just, the recorded history. And so I'm just gonna say that's a big issue separate. Let's just put that aside. Two, I'm gonna imagine we live in a universe where all of the AI tools were properly paid for and credited, et cetera, to answer this question. And three, I do want anyone listening out there, anyone, I think, what do we get? 2, 3 listens. But if anyone does listen, to realize that we are all, again, remind them, we are indie writers. And we realize the expense of getting a cover, of getting an editor, of getting these things, and you can't afford it. All right. I can't afford it. I have a friend who does, some graphic stuff. I did most of the last cover I did, and maybe they're not great. Maybe they are. I don't know. But that's just the world we do live in normally. If you want something done by a professional, it's going to cost you money. And if you can't, well, maybe do the best you can yourself or find a friend who might, et cetera. Look on, hey, there are people who want to get their start, and being able to point to a book cover is a good start for them. So anyway, so those are the three. So I just want so as far as this, I looked at the things, and the only one that leapt out at me that I would use in my alternate universe world is the one where you get prompts, randomly generated prompts, because that's kind of like free association. And that has been used very often in problem solving and, breakthrough, trying to get, when you're stuck and you're at an impasse, some brainstorming tools, there's free association. And I could see something generating some random responses just to help trigger something, like Renaissance murder mystery. Just pull something out. It might trigger something in my mind. I could see that. I have to say, I have Microsoft tools and Apple tools, but I have Microsoft tools, and Microsoft recently, as they love to do, they pushed their AI out there, and it took me a while to turn it off because honestly, I don't know how some of you people out there do it, because I was trying to just write an email. And the fact that it kept assuming what I wanted to write, and this was actually, I was writing to a person about solar panels and stuff, and it just kept assuming what I wanted to write was distracting. I kept seeing the text popping up that I don't want. I don't mean, no, I'm not saying that. And it was very irritating. I don't know how you get used to that. I don't know how you work around that, how you could keep your flow of concentration and thought when you're writing something, when it's like somebody, that when they do in a comedy, somebody thinks they're finishing someone else's sentences, but they don't. They keep getting it wrong. And you can see the one person getting very irritated by that. That's what it was very much like. And then, when I went into Word to start writing a new book I'm working on, oh my gosh, there it was again. And it was even more irritating because I want a blank canvas. It's almost like if you were painting, someone's grabbing your hand and moving the brush when you're going, no. In fact, the one time I have problems, I should say, the primary time I have problems with spell check and grammar is when I'm writing dialogue, because it keeps saying, that's not good grammar. I know
Right.
it's not good grammar.
What if you had a book that had a typo intentionally in the title, right?
Right. I mean, intentionally, yeah. Right. And so yeah, And that's irritating. You have to learn that in your dictionary, but you really don't want it in your dictionary. But that's not AI. But the AI ones, I find, I don't, honestly, for those people who do use it out there, I am curious how you get around that mentally with the auto completion of stuff. I know we use it on texting and it's a word pops up. That's different from writing, from freely writing, typing a little.
I very rarely even notice it.
Yeah.
And
Well,
I think it's kind of like with watching TV when the commercials come on. I somehow have trained my brain to shut down when the commercials come on, and I don't
yeah.
even notice commercials. I don't pay attention to commercials, and I think it's the same way with this thing on in Word where suddenly you can see the little faint letters suggesting how you should finish the sentence or something like that. I just I don't even see it. Don't even see
I
it.
don't think my
Unfortunately,
version of Word is that up to date because I've not seen those. I thought it was an option, something you could turn on and off.
I had to
I
turn
had
it
to
off.
turn it
Yeah,
on.
it's their
But
new. Yeah, it's their new thing. It shows up in the upper right. Honestly, Mark, I don't have that luxury. I'm one of those people who even pays to have commercial-free stuff if I can. But I have the kind of brain which that I call the little Poirot inside me, where I notice a small detail, and it sticks there, and I can ignore one or two. But when it's a constant flow,
Yeah, yeah,
I can tune out sounds. When I can tune out modalities, so I can be writing with music, or I could be listening to music while something's on the TV I'm not really paying attention to. I can focus modality, but when I'm in a modality, it's really tough.
yeah.
So the only other one was, I think you mentioned, like, for people who they get stuck and they want AI to write something for them. I understand that. I do get it, because there's somebody, it's as if you asked a friend, hey, what would you write here? And yeah, you're not going to write that, but it's, you see what they do. But me personally, I don't want my start of a book to be, it was a dark and stormy night, because that's
Yeah.
the most whatever. I don't want that. Because in fact, I even have said in our past chats that I will sometimes avoid reading other comedies, books, that are comedic when I'm writing comedy, because I don't want to be influenced. It's specifically that. It's like, Audrey, you again, it's my voice I want. It's my craft I'm trying to do. And if I'm not doing it, then what is the point? If something else is doing it for me, or someone else is doing it for me, you know. But then you can make the argument, what if you co-authored something? So, I could see it. I understand it. I don't agree with it. It's definitely not for me. So the
you
only
know,
one,
I'm thinking this whole thing reminds me of athletes. You know how a long time ago running shoes were a certain way, and now they've been developed, so supposedly the performance is much better, and nobody's going to say no, you have to run barefoot because that's the natural, although some people do apparently,
Yes.
that kind of thing. But of course you draw the line at people who take performance enhancing drugs. Those guys are supposedly drummed out of the Olympics and shamed if they, cyclists who've used drugs and stuff like that. So to me, AI is kind of like that drug. And once you start taking it, it's like, you're going down that slippery slope. But whether some AI is sort of like better shoes, I don't know. I guess each of us has to decide for ourselves just what works for us.
One of the things I saw someone mention, probably on Twitter, was the speculation that the more people use AI to replace their own human creativity, then that risks the loss of humans being able to be creative. And I compare it to, so I have a question for everybody. When you were a kid, how many phone numbers did you have memorized compared to how many phone numbers you now have memorized? Because you don't have to anymore. Your phone has all the numbers in it, right? How did you used to find, how did you used to figure out how to get to a place that you'd never been to before? You figured it out. Now your phone does it for you. All of these things that I think of as basic, like human skills, are being lost because our phone does it for us now. And I feel like the same thing could happen with AI, that the more it takes over, the more people use it for things to replace human skills, means we lose those skills.
Yeah,
I
that's a complex one because human skills are always being replaced. Uh,
Yeah.
I mean, I was reading an article about a bonobo monkey that just passed away, and it learned to create stone tools, but it lacked the capacity that humans who created stone tools did for knowing just the right force to use to get the best results, and then et cetera. And that's something we all don't have anymore. They make stone tools, but our predecessors were perfect at it. We wouldn't even know what to do. So, skills are always being gained and lost as part of the mutability of our brains. But I think the issue with AI is the tool itself. I've mentioned this before. I think that if you don't have new creative information coming in, then it's just so much that tool is going to be able to do, right? It's just going to hit a wall where it's all I know, and I don't know how to know more.
Mhm.
So in that case, I think yeah, it could be a dead end, and probably will be for creativity. But you are completely correct about the loss of skills. I think that has accelerated with technology. How many people know how to make bread? I do. Yeah, most of us do. But I have a lot of friends who wouldn't know how to use the basic implements on a stove. But at one point, everyone knew how to do something in order to eat food to survive, or you get sick and die. Um, you know, so
Hmm. Well, all I can say is I have I guess I've memorized. I don't have a password preserver or whatever that where
yeah.
you just remember one password and this thing does all the unique ones for. No, I get my passwords from they're randomly generated by something, maybe an AI, but they're just a jumble of characters and they're like 12 or 15 characters long, and I can just I don't even have to think anymore. It's muscle
Wow.
memory, and I have like probably a dozen of these things, and they work
Can you
just fine
be
for me.
can you be my password keeper for me?
Well, I don't know if that would work, but I probably could memorize yours too. But and then about going somewhere. I mean, yeah, I look up Google Maps and I even use maps on my phone. But if I really want to figure out where something is, I get out a map, like a paper map or
Mm.
an atlas. And so, but I'm old, so I think when I kick the
Yeah,
bucket,
yeah.
that those kind of skills will have one fewer person who has them. So that's it.
I
But
just have
one
to,
thing I don't have is really good skills on how to use my phone.
yeah.
Sad.
I just have to I have to share a personal story. My younger son is 27 years old now, and maybe around a year ago he told me, he said something along the lines of, "Hey Dad, you want to know what your superpower was when I was a kid?" It's like, "No, what was it?" He said, "You always knew how to get to where we needed to go." That somehow I always knew. So anyway, but I loved maps, and the Thomas guides, or just, the fold out map but now I just have my phone. Anyway, um, have we beat AI to death for the time being?
I
Well,
wish.
I guess so.
Well,
yeah, I have to say I
I'm, I'm,
wish.
I'm going to just make one more comment because I feel like this is sort of a tradition on here, but I won't name names, but I'll just say this. There are certain famous writers out there who it seems like churn out the same book over and over again. And I feel like those writers could be using AI. They could start using AI. They could have been using AI already to write their books, and no one would actually be able to tell.
Yeah.
So I feel like that for certain, maybe especially for genre fiction, it's
Hmm.
probably just inevitable that AI will take over and be churning out books
Yeah.
you won't even know
Yeah.
happening.
Yeah. Some genres are a perfect fit for AI, and the readers are perfect for it too, because they want they want something that follows the pattern, that follows the formula. And Richard has something to say.
Yeah, no, I Bertolds just hit me with an idea that I guarantee you may happen. It's very, I think the possibilities are. You know that for a moment there was a point where Hollywood, and they still do, they do, you know, I think they have to get permissions at least now, but we're figuring, hey, we can make movies using AI with Humphrey Bogart and you know, get people who are no longer with us and bring them back. And, you know, there are movies where we've already done that. And that kind of caused that little, but imagine you're a publishing house with, say, I'm going to pick a random author, like say Stephen King, okay, or whatever, John Grisham or something, I don't know. And your author passes away. Well, one of the rights you may have, depending on what we do with AI, is to perpetually create new Stephen King's, John Grisham books. Just roll them out the door. Here's the latest from Shakespeare, you know? You know, but I do see a publishing house who currently owns the rights on books, making that case in court. I would not be surprised. It's like we have the rights to the material, and we're going to use the material as we see fit. It's in our contract.
Yeah.
So,
Yep.
I don't like the oh, who wrote To Kill a Mockingbird?
Harper Lee.
Harper Lee, and how she died how many years ago, and now they're publishing books that, I don't know, did she write those books?
They're rough drafts. What it is,
Yeah.
they took her rough drafts and published it like it's a book. It's kind of a,
Yeah.
yeah.
well, they did that. They do that with a lot of writers. Tolkien,
Yes. No. Yeah.
stuff that they were partially, you know, completed. Yeah. But still, there's an end to those. At some point, someday, there will be no more new Beatle recordings dug up. You know, although they did have
Right.
AI assisted one, but that's a real gray line, that one. But this is filling some vocals. But you know, they keep digging up tapes of, oh yeah, I forgot we recorded that one, or whatever.
Yeah.
You know, so that has been happening for a while. But this, you know, they do own the rights to the work for X number of years, and they can republish that work as they see fit, snippets, pieces. So,
Yeah.
Plus,
I mean,
once something's in the public domain, what's to stop anybody from, like Shakespeare?
well, yeah, once things are in public domain, but I'm saying even before public domain, even like with the current contractual agreements that
Yeah.
public have, I may have given somebody $1 million idea there, you know. And I will regret it inside, but if they pay me enough money, maybe that'll soothe the conscience. All right, so we done with AI because
Yeah. I don't think, like I said,
getting read.
it's not any of our, it's not a favorite topic for any of us, but it just seems like it just keeps coming up and keeps coming up in different ways. And that's what's going to happen. So, okay. I threw out an idea because of something I saw on social media again. And I don't know if we want to do this, the Mount Rushmore of your 4 favorite authors. I think I said when I mentioned it, I don't think I have an answer to that, but I'm just curious if you guys have your Mount Rushmore of favorite authors.
Well, my Mount Rushmore would be really full of all kinds of people. Like, I don't think I have, like, that's a big, that would be your very most favorite or author you esteem the most. And there's a couple of ways to think about this. Number one, who is an author whose book you, as soon as you heard they had a new book out, and let's set AI aside here, as soon as you heard there was a new book out by this person, you would right away buy it. Never mind what it's about, or, you know, if it's some genre or other, it's by that person, so you buy it. And the other one is, what author would you most like to be able to write like? You know, like as a writer, which one would you like to emulate the most? And then I asked myself, okay, so who are these people for you? And then I didn't really come up with any good answers, but one author that, for both cases, that kind of popped into my mind was Mary Renault. I don't know if you know her. She's died a long time ago, but she wrote a whole bunch of books set in ancient Greece. and sort of a trilogy about Alexander the Great. And I've read those. This was back when I used to reread books a lot, just because there weren't as many around, and books were all in print. And every now and then you just pull one off the shelf and say, "Oh yeah, I'd like to read that again." So I've read some of her books multi times, and the prose style and everything has kind of soaked in to my author voice. And I have a feeling her style is probably reflected in some of my writing. So that's one person that comes to mind. And then I thought, well, who else? And that's where I kind of drew a blank. Like I thought, okay, I kind of admire Leo Tolstoy, because especially his novel Anna Karenina, because I've read that a few times in English translations that probably weren't the best. And I just sort of the richness of it and the variety of characters and how real the characters feel and the way they interact and all that stuff. So those two people, Mary Renault and Tolstoy. And then there's others. There's Tolkien and Stephen King, even his earlier books. I was quite. I think I was at a stage a long time ago where if he popped out a new book, I'd rush out and buy it. Not anymore, not for a long time. But at one point, yeah, he was like that for me. So, oh yeah, and Peter Straub. Have you ever read anything by him? He wrote, he's dead now, I believe, wrote sort of these weird horror stories that were, yeah, there was a horror element, but there was a lot more to it. And some of them were the kind of book where you reread it because you weren't quite sure if you got it the last time you read it. And I find that kind of book to be irresistible. It's sort of the unreliable narrator and kind of a weirdness, and did this, really fit with that? And maybe you kind of think if you read it again, it might turn out differently. And I think that's kind of cool. So I'll just stop there. So Peter Straub, Stephen King, early Stephen King, Leo Tolstoy, and Mary Renault. Those would be my Mount Rushmore people.
So I always tell the story about The Shining was the first King book that I ever read, and I read it when I was around 14 or 15, and I was home by myself one Saturday, and it absolutely, terrified me. I think Peter Straub's Ghost Story was the next book I read, and while it wasn't at the level of The Shining terror, it also did a number on my feeling secure in my home thing. So, but anyway. I think you mentioned Tolkien. I think if I could come up with 4 people for Mount Rushmore of writers, he would be one of them.
Yeah.
And I agree, or at least Stephen King, but nothing for 25 years, 30 years from him. Richard or Bertolt?
Just a side note, I was more of a Dean Koontz reader than Stephen King, and I loved his books. Phantoms was my favorite. But that actually brings me to why I had a lot of trouble with this. I figured if it's going to be Mount Rushmore, it should be people who were dead, first of all. And then I just kept thinking, well, do I want to put a one-hit wonders up there? Like I admit, I actually read Moby Dick, and I actually loved it. But that's the only book I ever read from Melville. And I don't know. So I started thinking, I said, okay, I would have to put, and again, not because I'm connected and can read easily his works, but because they're part of our culture so much, infused in almost in the English language, but Shakespeare. And for me personally, it's on psychology. And he hit on concepts that Freud had yet to talk about, and Freud even, would use as a reference. And that to me, because I love character development. I love what motivates a character when I read a story. So not for the speech, although for the cultural aspects, but really for just being an author who focused on the psychology of a character, so often and brilliantly. So yeah, there'd be that. And then I thought about people who are kind of genre specific that I have probably read a million times. Like I mentioned a lot that I read every single Agatha Christie book, but her writing is good. Don't get me wrong, but is it Mount Rushmore worthy? So there's a whole bunch like that. Like Roger Zelazny, gosh, what a creative genius. Isaac Asimov, etc. And Zelazny does have his moments in prose that are just beautiful, but moments. So I kind of move them aside, and I think I might put, if I'm going to go in that genre, science fiction, etc. And yes, I read Tolkien like 40 times, but again, oh, there's the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit.
Yeah.
So I think I would actually put Ursula Le Guin there if I were going to go with the genre area of fantasy, science fiction. I think she, again, only because in the prose, she has a huge volume of work and the prose is really pretty good. And then, I don't know, Dickens. And again, it's a classic. Dickens. But I really did like his stuff. And then finally, I had to put somebody in comedy, and I think Bertold will know who I would put up there. Only because a certain amount of genius in the lack of the comedy where we've grown so used to is not the comedy he focuses on. Is what I mean is Woodhouse, P.G. Woodhouse. There's a brilliance in his writing where it's at the word and sentence level. And that is just you may read his stuff and not think it's that funny, but the craft itself is, so yeah, those might be the four. And again, because there are people I admire now that I would put up there, but they're still alive. So, those are my.
Well, I had very similar thoughts to Richard. I was like, well, they have to be no longer with us is one criterion. But then I was sort of thinking like, who is most significant to me? I agree, no one-hit wonders, so I could not put John Kennedy Toole on there, even though Confederacy of Dunces is a great book, in my opinion. Although it's also a divisive book. It's a love it or hate it book, but I love it. But it's his only one. And then, yes, Woodhouse was obviously my first choice, and I think you covered him pretty well, Richard, so he's on mine as well. So then my second entry, and this is the one that I really struggled with, but I had to do it, is Lovecraft. Because there's an odd quality to Lovecraft stories that I can reread them. I don't even like his writing. This is what baffles me. I don't particularly like his writing. And I'm not even getting into like the personal, there are things about Lovecraft that, like, on a character level, he's actually kind of a terrible person. I'll just say that. But, and yet it's almost like hypnotic, especially music of Eric Zahn or
the Dream Quest of Unknown
Dream
Kadath.
Quest. Yeah, Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath. These things, I can just go back and read them again and again. And I go, he made so many weird choices I disagree with, but there's something about that story that does haunt you. So in that sense, I have to say he is a significant writer for me.
Me too, I guess. I really should. I shouldn't have left him out, but that's what I meant by my Rushmore would have a whole lot of people on it.
Yeah, I mean it's always tough. Now I'm going to do another weird choice and put on W.S. Gilbert, who, if you've probably heard of Gilbert and Sullivan. He's mostly famous for writing these comic operas. He did write a few other things. He was mostly a satirical writer in Victorian times, kind of a little bit after Dickens. And his ability to mix humor and social commentary in sort of fantasy settings is something that I really admire. And I read a lot of his plays when I was like a teenager, and I think it still sticks with me that I would like to be able to do as much witty and clever and insightful things while still telling a good story and still creating a world that's enjoyable. So just for that, I put him up there. Okay, so Woodhouse, Lovecraft, Gilbert. And then the fourth place, I struggled with this. Like, I thought about putting Robert Chambers on there just for The King in Yellow, But even though he's not a one-hit wonder, he did do other things. I don't think anything else he did was particularly noteworthy. That's such a great book. I could almost do it. But I think I'm going to go with George Orwell again for his ability to do social commentary through science fiction, through allegory. And he was also just a good journalistic writer. He could write actually nonfiction reporting on things in a way that was very interesting. And then it's interesting to read like some of his nonfiction work and then go back and read a novel like 1984. And you can see how experiences that he had like in the Spanish Civil War translated into his fiction and how he used that to make a story. So I guess those are going to be my four. That it was really hard. It was harder than I thought it would be.
Yeah. Before you triggered something, Bertel, that I realized I would maybe want to swap ahead for, because I wasn't thinking of plays, but you're right. I've read quite a number. It's not in my mind, and I would say Tennessee Williams. I've read a lot.
Yeah.
I've read every single one of his plays. And again, I think it's the psychology aspect that always attracts me. And yeah. So anyway, footnote on that. Sorry, Mark.
No, that's okay. As I said, I struggled with this and didn't even really come up with anything before we started talking, but certain things that you guys said have triggered things for me. I think when I was in my 20s, there were a lot of authors who, as soon as they came out with a new book, I went out and bought the book. Stephen King, Richard, you mentioned Dean Koontz. I went through a Dean Koontz phase. John Grisham, a whole bunch of kind of popular authors that I would race out and buy the next book. But with all of them, they became repetitious or redundant, or Dean Koontz basically wrote the same story over and over again. It really, and after I read 4 or 5 of them, it's like, it's the same thing.
That's why Phantoms was the one that was the most different. That may be why It Lasts is my favorite.
To me, it was the Odd Thomas books that kind of broke the mold a little bit. But anyway, so the way I look at it is now, in looking at this question, is it's not authors, it's books. It's individual books that strike me. And there are some that I was thinking about. Wally Lamb was at one point a guy who I might buy every book he wrote. He wrote something called, I think this much I know is true, or something like that just kind of blew me away. And the next book he wrote was not quite as good. And then the next book he wrote was, so I'm not really into that, into much more. Another writer was Thomas Harris, who wrote Silence of the Lambs, and some very similar types of stories before and after that I really enjoyed. And then the two that I wanted to mention that are still on the I'll buy this person's book when it comes out. John Krakauer, who wrote Into Thin Air, Into the Wild, Where Brave, I forget. I don't know if you know the story about Patrick. John Krakauer writes true stories. It's nonfiction. And he wrote one, Patrick Tillman, who was a NFL player who left football to join the military after 9/11 and was killed in Afghanistan. He wrote a book about him. He writes excellent nonfiction. And then the other one who also does the same thing is Eric Larson, who wrote Devil in the White City.
Oh yeah, I've read several books by Eric Larson. Yeah.
He's when he puts a book out, I go buy it. And the same thing with John Krakauer. So anyway, that's my early Stephen King, Token, and then I don't know. I'll put books up in the next 2 places rather than people. So anyway, do we want to talk about Easter eggs, or we had enough for today? I'm not sure there's much to say.
Next time.
Okay, let's save it for next time.
In fact, we could do, talk more about the whole concept behind them rather than just rattling off a couple that we've done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, that I'll just not to get ahead of us, but that was something Lovecraft did too, which was what gave me the idea.
Oh, he did?
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, we can give some thought to that.
Well, it's also something Stephen King does, but unfortunately, what he does is he drops Easter eggs in connection with other stories that he's written.
We always get in something against Stephen King.
Yes.
We have to.
Well, we say
Not Richard.
You're innocent, Richard. If he sees this, he'll know you're okay.
I provoke.
I don't think he's struggling to continue to make his millions. So I don't think we're gonna.
Yeah, no, we've talked. I've talked about him, but I just like provoking, use him for that point than actually trashing.
Let's admit it. We're just jealous.
He seems like a nice guy. Like I
does. I like the guy, and honestly, I just did. Me personally, I only read a couple of his books, so
Okay.
Yeah, I was gonna say the one I did enjoy the most was his least non-horror, is Dolores Claiborne. So go figure.
Yeah, I like that one too.
Yeah.
And it sort of has that the other piece of that was called Gerald's Game. And that's a really good one. I mean, it's pretty kind of grisly in some ways, but it's very interesting.
Stephen King Grizzly? When?
Yeah. Well, grisly, but interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. You have to have the interesting in there or you lost me.
Right. Okay. Thank you, everybody.
You.
All right.
Okay.
Have a good rest of your weekend.
Week or month.
Yep.
Take
Okay.
it.
Bye.
Bye.
I'm going to record this. So you like Shakespeare and Dickens.
And Thomas Hardy.
Oh, good old Thomas Hardy. I've read enough of him. I thought about it. I thought about putting him on there. I didn't, but that's a good choice. Yeah. What's your favorite Hardy?
Test of the D'Urbervilles, I think.
Yeah. Yep.
I'm actually just watching. Well, I've done about 4 or 5 episodes of The Mayor of Casterbridge at the moment. It's an old version, but it's very well acted. But I think Tess, because that was one of the first books that ever I started crying.
Yeah. That's
actually got me to tears. What's the word I want? Gosh, I'm losing words on a daily basis now. This is getting worse and worse. The unfairness of it all, and how it was so cruel. Life was so cruel to her just because she didn't have to be born to wealthy parents or the nobility or something. But I think those 3 spring to mind.
Yeah. Good choices. I'm glad you said Hardy because I should have mentioned him at least. All right. Well, and so we ended up we decided we're going to save the Easter egg thing for next time anyway, so you didn't miss anything on that.
Yeah, you'll have to remind me again what that was. Oh yes, the hidden in jokes.
Yeah, in jokes.
In jokes and things like
references to our friends.
References to other things.
Yeah.
We used to have those when we worked on productions, if we were broadcasting.
Oh,
and
yeah.
we realized that it was not a good idea to do because we'd all end up in fits of laughter. And of course, I presume the people watching the programs are things that we have a mentality of about a 3-year-old, so we try to stop doing it, but it's very tempting. Very tempting.